This year I have even less best books to talk to you guys about than I did last year, which really sucks because 2023 was also hella mediocre. But we all know that not all 4 stars are ones that stick with you forever. Some are ones that you just enjoy in the moment and kind of forget about. And not all 5 stars are created equal. And to be honest, I did only have 5 5-star reads in 2024 anyway. I do have 6 true best books of the year that I'm going to be talking about. Those are the ones that form the bulk of this list. But I do have 1 honorary mention because I do only have 5 5-star reads. I feel like I should mention all of them, even though one of them isn't one that I would consider like a new favorite of all time. And I also have 2 non-fictions that I would like to mention. Non-fiction I do rate very differently, obviously, than I do fiction novels. And also because I'm not a non-fiction reader, I feel like they're a little bit out of place in my best books of the year. But if you are looking for non-fiction recommendations, I mean, I'm not the girl to be coming to if you are, but I enjoyed them, so I thought I would just like throw them in here and talk about them briefly as well. So we are just gonna hop right into it because we know that I haven't had my best reading year, and we know that I don't even know how to fix it because I'm reading books that I think I'm going to enjoy and I'm DNFing them, and then there's some in here that I absolutely did not want to read that are now in my best books of the year, so I don't even know who I am anymore, never mind how to enjoy a book. We'll start with the honorary mention. I'm not really going to say much about this. I just wanted to talk about it because it is a 5-star read and there were so few of them. But it is Die Fantasy Heartbreaker, which is the first book in a graphic novel series. It is like 4 parts and I read all of the parts in 2024. The reason why this is not on my best books list is because while I thought that this was an amazing 5-star introduction to a series, the series as a whole didn't hold up. So it kind of like, when I reflect on them as a package, it's no longer a 5-star series, even though this one first installment I did give 5 stars to. Briefly touching upon the 2 non-fictions. One of them was a 5-star and that was Brittany's autobiography, which is called The Woman in Me. This was eye-opening, it was enlightening, and it was shocking, and I truly did not understand what a tumultuous life Brittany had had, because this mainly focuses on the time of her life where she was put into the conservatorship, where her family took control of her life, her career, and her money. So I was prepared to be shocked regarding that part of it, but I don't think I actually realized how much had gone on in her life before that, leading up to this moment. So I thought that this was very interesting, very shocking, definitely well worth reading, or I personally listened to it. But like I said, I do rate non-fiction a little bit differently than I do fiction novels because it's a very different kind of book. And then I also listened to The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green, which is a reflection on humanity that is assembled as like a collection of shower thoughts almost. So I'll give you an example of one of the chapter titles. Piggly Wiggly, Penguins of Madagascar, Sunsets. It is John Green kind of going into just a little bit of depth because some of the chapters, actually the majority of them, are less than 10 pages, but just going into a little bit of depth on a variety of seemingly miscellaneous and unconnected topics, but framing them from the perspective of how overwhelmingly beautiful humanity is, but also how overwhelmingly terrible humanity is. So one of the topics that John Green goes into in this book is how we have the power to end the world. Greenhouse gases are increasing. We are contributing to the increase of greenhouse gases. We are hurtling towards apocalypse and we are doing nothing about it. We do not have the power to reverse it, but we have the power to accelerate it. So it's how we can do such grand, impactful things, but are also completely useless at the same time. I loved the insight that this provided into John Green's mind, and I am very interested in picking up his next nonfiction, which is on my anticipated releases of the year list, which is going specifically into tuberculosis, which actually forms part of this book as well. So not something I expected to really enjoy, but I found it to be very engaging and insightful, especially because he has so much hope in humanity, whereas I think we all suck. So moving on to the true top 6, I think I pretty much have these in order. The main exception I think would be the top 2 because they are very different kinds of books, and so depending on what mood I'm in is depending on like which one I would pick as my favorite. So I've gone with the one based on what I typically and historically enjoy as being like my favorite book of the year, but realistically like they're kind of not comparable because I like very different things about them and I like them both for very different reasons. But the spot at number 6, this is my favorite contemporary romance of the year. Not one of my favorite contemporary romances I've ever read, but definitely the standout of 2024, and that is Dating Dr. Dill by Nisha Sharma. So this one is the first book in the If Shakespeare Were an Auntie Auntie series, which is a series of contemporary Shakespearean retellings with Indian main characters. So in this one, we are following Karina, whose father is about to sell their family home. Now, Karina's mother has died, but this is the home that she grew up in, that her parents were in love in, and her mother loved to renovate the house, and Karina also loves to renovate it. It is her passion project. However, her father is wanting to retire. The unfairness of this is that there is actually a big pot of money that is set aside for when Karina and her sister either buy a house or get married. However, to buy a house, to use that money to buy a house, they have to be married, which Karina is not. So her father is not willing to give her her share of the money to buy the house from him or to put down a deposit on the house when he sells it. So he essentially gives her an ultimatum, and he's like, if you can get engaged in this amount of time, then I will allow you to use that money to buy the house. So I think this happens on our main character's birthday, and she ends up meeting and hooking up with a guy who is our main love interest, Dr. Dill, and he has a TV show where he discusses heart health, and he absolutely does not believe in love at all. He believes that love is actually just a concoction of hormones, and this is the kind of thing that he talks about on his show. So Karina's sister is an influencer, and the day after they hook up, Karina's sister is on Dr. Dill's show, where Karina hears what Dr. Dill has to say about true love and completely flies off the handle, and this compromises Prem's ability to raise money from investors to open a very much needed community health center amongst marginalized communities. So this is not even quite a fake dating story, I would say. It is more these two dancing around the idea of fake dating, because Prem's mother has money that she will give him if he gets married, and Karina needs to be engaged to get the money from her father. So they kind of float the idea of fake dating, entering into an arranged or like fake marriage to get what they want, even though Karina is a hopeless romantic and Prem doesn't believe in love at all. And instead of it actually being a true arranged marriage or forced marriage or fake dating situation, it's more them flirting with the idea of it while they're also falling for each other, whilst both digging their heels in about one of them believing in romance and the other one not. So I really loved the banter and the chemistry between these two. I also really liked the humor that was provided just in general with the chaos of this situation, but also like I think Karina's aunties I really liked, and also some of the comedic situations that arose because of that. I really hated the situation that Karina was put in by her family though, and I hated the unfairness of it and the kind of situation that they put her in to get money for something that was so meaningful to her. But overall, I was just very thoroughly charmed by this. It does have a unfortunate word that Prem uses for a part of his body. He calls a certain part of his body Charlie, which I had heard going into this and it had put me off it a little bit, but actually it's not used as frequently or as weirdly as I thought it was going to be. So if you too are worried about that, then I would like try and put it out of your mind and give this one a try, because I really enjoyed it. One that I actually expected to DNF, one that I did not even want to read. The only reason why I picked this up is because it was a book in 2 subscription boxes that I rep for, so I ended up with multiple copies of it. And when that happens, I do give the books a try because I have them. And I'm glad that I did, because I really enjoyed this despite me being adamant I was not going to, and that is Babel by R.F. Kuang. Can you believe that this book is in my best books of the year? Because I was like vocal about how I didn't want to read this book as well. The reason why, if anyone is curious why I didn't want to read this, is that I have read The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang and I really didn't like it, and out of all of these synopses of all of her books, that is the one that I expected to enjoy, and this one is just not topically anything that I would reach for. It seems very pretentious. It's set in Oxford University. It's historical, set in a time period that I notoriously am just truly not interested in, so this was really set up to fail for me. However, it was a pretty big success. I have criticisms, but overall I really loved it, and it's something that I continue to think about. So in this one, we are following a young man called Robin, and he has been taken from China by a rich English gentleman and raised amongst English society. However, he has very much been raised as a ward, not as a son, and with a clear purpose in mind, because the magic system of this world is based on silverworking, and to be a most effective silver worker, you have to be fluent in a language that is not English. This one is set in the height of the British Empire. It is the early 1800s. words. The way that the magic works is essentially you have two words in two languages that mean almost the same thing, and the magic works in the gap between the translation because no two words are exactly the same. Like, they're slightly different even though they mean roughly the same thing when you're translating between languages. So to be very effective at silverworking, you have to have an innate ingrained knowledge of a different language. So Robin also speaks Cantonese, however that is not valuable to the people in the society, so that is pretty much like neglected and it's a language that he forgets, while his knowledge of Mandarin is very much honed, sharpened and practiced. This of course is all to prepare him to go to Oxford. So when he goes to Oxford, he doesn't quite realize how much he's been treated differently than regular people are treated by their family. However, upon attending Oxford, he goes to Babel, which is the translation school, and that is the only place where women and people of color are allowed to attend Oxford. And when he becomes friends with people who are darker skinned than he is, he starts to really see the prejudice against himself and also people of color that is being harbored and encouraged within the society. It is almost like they are being used for their unique ability to be fluent in different languages, while at the same time being severely othered by everybody else around them. So this book is a critique on colonialism, on racism, especially the way it is harbored in privileged institutions like Oxford historically, but also in present day, and also the way that racism is still ingrained in our society today. And the beauty of this book is the way that it makes you feel uncomfortable and question your own beliefs that you maybe didn't think that you have. You maybe don't consider yourself to be a racist person, but also are not quite aware of the way that society, even today, still slightly leans towards racist behaviors and beliefs. So I loved all of that. The actual narrative and plot of this I really enjoyed as well. The thing that I didn't love is how heavy-handed that messaging was. I think that the beauty of this book, or of books like this, is your ability to read them and feel uncomfortable and then have to sit with that discomfort and figure out what it is that is making you feel so uncomfortable. That is the power of books like this, and I feel like it was a little bit undermined by R.F. Kuang constantly hammering in the message. Like, every time something racist would happen in this book, we would have a scene where everyone gets together to discuss in explicit, plain detail the racism that has just happened, which I do feel like takes a little bit of the power away from this story. But overall, I was definitely blown away by how much I enjoyed this, how much I flew through it, and it's a pretty dense read. It's nothing too difficult, but it's not a quick read by any means, and also by how well written and atmospheric it was. One that I started off not loving, but by the end had like completely swept me away, was The Undertaking of Heart and Mercy by Megan Bannon. This is also the first book in a fantasy romance trilogy, but more in the style of contemporary romance or romantic comedy, where each book is an isolated romance with a new couple, all set in a fantastical world. So I would say this focuses on the romance as opposed to the fantasy, and because of that, the world building is something that you shouldn't think too hard about, which is essentially the reason why this was a 4-star from me and not a 5-star, because I just could not wrap my head around this world. So this one is a You've Got Mail retelling, and we are following an undertaker called Mercy who is trying to hold her family business together. Her family undertaking business is called Birdsall and Sons, and she's kind of waiting for the son to return from university to take over the business, only to find out when he does that he has no interest in being an undertaker, which honestly ruins Mercy's life because she was just supposed to be stepping into this role until he took over, and now she kind of doesn't know what to do or how to break this news to her father, who has had to take a step back from this business because he's been unwell himself. And we are also following a marshal called Hart, who is living quite a lonely existence. The marshals of this world are tasked with patrolling this fantastical plane. It's like another dimension. They access it through a portal where there are creatures that are similar to zombies, and they kill them and bring them back to the undertakers for a proper burial. So essentially this starts off as a hate to love story, and one of my main complaints of this is that the whole reason why they hate each other is based on an easily remedied misunderstanding. So I felt like it wasn't, like, the extent to which they hate each other seems a little bit ridiculous based on where it originated from, because essentially they just met each other when they were both having a terrible day and they've hated each other ever since. But Hart does, in the line of his work, have to occasionally drop off bodies at Mercy's undertaking company. The narrative of this changes a little bit when one of them writes an anonymous letter and the other one receives it, and they start this pen pal relationship where they start to grow closer as friends before things start to turn obviously a little bit more romantic. It took me, I want to say like 30-40% to start enjoying this. One, because I didn't love the reason why they didn't like each other. I thought that it was a bit silly. And the second thing is that, like I said, you just have to take this world with a pinch of salt. It doesn't quite make sense to me. We have cars that are called aqueducts because they do travel on water, but I don't understand the logic of that because they never actually travel on water in this book, because it's not a world that has so much water that you would need to make cars specifically to travel on water. Now, I do believe that later in the series that is explored a little bit more, but it's just kind of nonsensical to me that the horses would have evolved or would have webbed feet to walk on water when there isn't any more water in this world than there is in our world, and we don't need the majority of our vehicles to work on water because the majority of the time we don't need to drive on water. You know what I'm saying? It also has a kind of Western steampunky feel where they don't have electricity. They have a lot of like wind up electrical objects. They also dressed very modern though, so it's not historical, and I spent a lot of time trying to really gain my bearings in this world before I kind of just let it go and focused on the romance. And when I did, I started to have a really good time because this falls into a category of romance that I really like, and it is where we have characters that are dealing with their own stuff. They have their own trauma that they are trying to, and failing to heal, and through a process of growing closer to each other, they also heal their own trauma while growing together at the same time. And I really liked that we took the time, especially because the majority of their relationship, they're just communing in letters and they don't know who each other is. So I'm really glad that we took the time to develop them as individual people with their own individual issues that very much needed resolving before we got into a romance, and then their relationship was better for it because they'd healed issues that they'd had previously. So I'm very excited to read the sequel to this and then the third book when it's released. And it was another one that really surprised me. I didn't really know what to expect going into it, and what I got was very different. Like, it would never have met my expectations because I would never have even known to expect something like this. In at number 3, we have A Little Hatred by Joe Abercrombie. This one was a contender for the top spot of the year for the longest time. However, now that I have finished this entire trilogy and also sat with it for a little while, as a package, as a full series, it is not quite as good as the first book is because things did not go the way that I wanted to in the sequels. So this one is the 8th book in Joe Abercrombie's First Law universe, but it is the first book in the second and currently final trilogy, because I believe at some point in the future he intends to continue, and there is definitely room to continue within this world. But this one is very hard to describe in terms of plot because the plot of this is essentially made up of elements, like small elements of every book that came before it. And even though you can read this as a trilogy, I would definitely recommend for a full picture and for more impact to read the First Law universe in order, starting with the Blade itself. But essentially what I can say about this plot is that we are following a group of characters who are all somehow related to or tied to characters that we have met before in the First Law world. The majority of them are in positions of privilege. They are royalty or they are nobility. We follow a few common people, but most of them are privileged. We have some old foes from the past resurfacing, causing some trouble. There is a lot of war in just this series as a whole, and it is no different in the Age of Madness series. And on top of that, we also have a workers' revolution coming to destabilize the society that our characters are living in. So not only are they facing upheaval from war, because for the majority of the main characters' lives they have lived in peacetime, but they are also facing destabilization of their way of life as the underclasses that they are forcing to work in inhumane conditions in the industrial age are getting tired and starting to rise up against them. The thing that made this one a little bit different from the rest of the Joe Abercrombie books, because by the time I got to this one, I was kind of done with Joe Abercrombie. I was excited for Catch Up Book Club to be over. I was excited to be done with First Law, and I probably wouldn't have read anything from Joe Abercrombie again, if I'm being honest, when I was done, until until I read this trilogy, which in my opinion is the best of First Law. But this book in particular follows characters that, like I said, have mainly experienced peacetime. The majority of them are quite young, and so while they are naive, sheltered, privileged, they're not inherently terrible people. Whereas earlier down the line in this series, if you were picking a favorite character, you were saying, okay, I really like this character because, but they've also done this incredibly horrific thing. Whereas these guys were a little bit more clean. Like, they hadn't had the life experience, they hadn't had the necessity to get their hands dirty, and so they became characters that I could root for, and I became more deeply invested in the characters in this series than I had in any other First Law characters. Now, I did know when I read this that it wasn't going to be good because I knew that Joe Abercrombie was either going to turn them into terrible people, kill them, or hurt them, and all of that happened. All of that happened throughout the course of this trilogy, but at this point I was just so invested in what was to come, and as well as being invested in the things that were happening around the characters, as I always had been in First Law, I was deeply invested in the characters' lives in a way that I was kind of scared for what was to come, which is like my favorite thing. Like, if I give a book 5 stars and it's a favorite, it's because I actually became emotionally invested. Whereas if I really enjoyed a book or a book was really good but I don't feel that level of investment, that's kind of where I give it 4 stars instead of 5. So this was definitely probably the best First Law book of all of them in my opinion. And now for our top 2 that are interchangeable. So the first one is The Crimson Moth by Kristen Cicerelli. This is another one that took me by surprise because this is a young adult fantasy romance. I wouldn't say it isn't young adult, but I would say that it has a little bit of a transience. Like, it could stray into the new adult category a little bit. It just reads a slight bit older, but then also I would say solidly falls into young adult. That is a demographic that I've grown out of progressively over the years, so I was not expecting a young adult fantasy romance to be one of my best books of the year, but this one really blew me away, especially because some of the themes in here and the way they were discussed. So plot-wise, in this one, we are following a woman called Rune, who is the Crimson Moth, which is a vigilante character that saves witches from execution. 2 years prior to the start of this story, Rune had to turn over her grandmother to the authorities. There was a big societal upheaval where witches were in power and the witch hunters came in and overthrew them because they were oppressing people and they had gotten a little bit used to their power and were now using it to hurt people. So they killed all of the witches that they could find, including Rune's grandmother. Her grandmother encouraged her to turn her, and it's not like she did it behind her back. But after that, Rune came into her own powers and became a witch herself, and since then has dedicated her life to freeing witches from the witch hunters before they can be executed. So at the start of this novel, she is hunting for a woman called Seraphine, who was a close friend of her grandmother, and just as she finds her, she realizes that the witch hunters were just there before her. So then she tries to get closer to the captain of the witch hunters, which is Gideon, to find information on where Seraphine is being kept so that she can free her. Gideon, on the other hand, is also trying to get close to Rune because he has a feeling that she could be the Crimson Moth because she's hiding in plain sight as a vapid socialite. His friend has said like, oh, maybe you should look into her because we know that it could be a member of the nobility. And so he starts to feign interest in her to figure out if she could be this vigilante figure. Now, there is a lot of other things kind of causing conflict in this relationship as well, because Rune's best friend is in love with her and Rune's best friend also happens to be Gideon's brother. So Gideon also has the conflict of the fact that he's fake dating the girl that his brother is in love with, and then it becomes even more complicated when these two start to have feelings for each other because Gideon doesn't think that he's good enough for Rune anyway, and he knows he has to step back because of his brother, and Rune knows that she is a witch, and because of things that happened in Gideon's background, if he finds out, he's never going to forget it and he's never going to forgive her regardless of how he feels about her. So as you can see, we have a lot of angst and tension in this setup. It also sounds a little bit like Serpent and Dove, but if you read Serpent and Dove and didn't enjoy it, then trust me, this is so much better. And one of my favorite things about this is, like with The Undertaking of Heart and Mercy, it deals with characters who have a lot of trauma in their background that start to heal and process their trauma as they are coming together. One of my favorite things that I love is a male love interest who thinks that he's not good enough for the female main character, even though he's actually like the best of his gender. And something that I particularly enjoyed about this is that it contains a male victim of domestic and sexual abuse that is never never emasculated or portrayed as weak or made to feel weak because of the abuse that they suffered, which I thought was so refreshing to see in a young adult fantasy romance, like portrayed in an actual healthy way. And I loved this book for that as well. So this is one because it was in a YA box. I know a lot of people had really enjoyed it, but honestly, I take fantasy romance recommendations with a pinch of salt a lot of the time these days because of, I guess, what TikTok has done for the publishing industry in that regard. So I was definitely very pleasantly surprised when I ended up loving this one and giving it 5 stars. And then my favorite book of 2024, I feel like some of you will have seen this come in because it was recommended to me as a book that would probably be one of my favorites before I even picked it up, but that is of course The Will of the Many by James Islington. This is a adult fantasy series, the first book in an adult fantasy series that has been compared to all of my favorite series by other people, but also by myself. So it was set up to be a 5-star from the start, and honestly, I went into this pretty much confident that it was going to be 5 stars, and it did not disappoint. I only have like a couple of niggly complaints about this one as well. Otherwise, it's almost like the perfect fantasy / very slight sci-fi book in my opinion. The plot of this one is incredibly complex, but also what I'm about to tell you won't even scratch the surface, so prepare yourselves. But this one is set in a country with a governmental system that is based on an MLM pyramid scheme where everybody is ceding will to the people above them. So you have the people at the bottom of the pyramid that cede will to the people above, they cede to the people above, and on and on and on until we reach the top of the pyramid. And the people who are higher up in the society have titles that are based on what level of the pyramid they're on. So one of our main characters that we're introduced to, Ulquiskor, I'm pretty sure is E Quintus in this world, which means that he is on the 5th level of this 7-tier pyramid, 8-tier pyramid. So our main character is actually from a country that has been conquered by this one. This one is called Catan, and he has managed to fly under the radar and not cede any will, like because of what this country and the system did to his own. He wants nothing to do with it at all, and his only dream is to avoid having to become part of this pyramid scheme. So he currently lives in an orphanage, and he also works part-time at a prison. Ulquiskor, the Quintus, comes to see a prisoner, so our main character takes him down to the cells, and Ulquiskor starts to discuss like important matters with this prisoner, and because he doesn't want our main character Viz to know what he's saying, he does it in a dead language. However, Viz actually has the education of a prince because he was raised amongst the royal family of a kingdom that was conquered by Catan, and so he understands the gist of this conversation, which Ulquiskor immediately notices. So eventually Ulquiskor goes to the orphanage where Viz lives, and he offers to adopt him on, well, one condition, a number of conditions, and that is that Viz allows Ulquiskor to train him to enter this elite academy where he will then spy on the man who runs the academy, Viridius. Ulquiskor is the head of military and Viridius is the head of religion. The third tenet, I think, is governance. Ulquiskor believes that Viridius is doing something that is going to give religion more control in society and take control away from military, which he doesn't want to happen. But he also has an ulterior motive, because when Ulquiskor's brother was attending this academy run by Viridius, Ulquiskor's brother died and it was ruled a suicide, but Ulquiskor has always believed that Viridius had something to do with it. So he trains Viz to go to this academy, rise up through the ranks, figure out what religion is doing that is going to undermine military, find out what really happened to Ulquiskor's brother. But then Viz is also approached by a rebellion who want to destabilize the hierarchy and blackmailed into spying for them. He also then has his own agenda where he just wants to have a peaceful life for himself, where he's powerful enough that he doesn't have to receive will from anybody or cede will to anybody, and he can just live quietly alone outside of this governmental system that has ruined his entire life. Like I said, that doesn't even scratch the surface of what we have going on here, but I feel like it does a really good job at introducing the key players and plot threads that are established pretty early on. There are a multitude of reasons why I love this one. A lot of people compared it to Red Rising. That is how y'all convinced me to read this, and I definitely agree, especially when we get to the academy portion of this book. However, if you are in this for the academy, like if you are wanting those like magic school-esque vibes, do be warned that it's not the entire book. Like it takes a little while for that to kick in, so you do have a ways to go before you get that, if that's your driving force for entering into this one. For me, this also reminded me a lot of Nevernight by J. Kristoff, because the characters are almost exactly exactly the same, in the same situation where the government has destroyed their family and they enter a prestigious institution that arms them with the tools to take their revenge should they wish. The difference being that Mia in Nevernight wants to take revenge and Viz in this kind of just wants to mind his own business. All three of those series I've just mentioned, so this, Nevernight and Red Rising, are all also heavily inspired by the Roman Empire, which I've said it before, but books inspired by the Roman Empire are my Roman Empire. And then the last thing that this kind of reminds me of, which I haven't heard a lot of people say about this, but they definitely say it about James Islington's Licanius series, and that is Brandon Sanderson. And for me, it's the way that James Islington writes and also constructs his stories that remind me of Sanderson, because he is very, very good at world building and pacing. In my opinion, it will be slow for a lot of people, but for me, it is done perfectly in that you are never really confused while you are reading, because the world is very well grounded and is very well explained. Everything that you are introduced to, James Islington will be helping you to understand as you are exploring that part of the novel. However, the world keeps growing. When you think that it can't get any bigger, any more complex, when you think that there isn't another secret for you to uncover, lo and behold, there is. And it's that level of world building that makes me really believe and be well rooted in a world. And it also keeps me invested and interested because I haven't reached the scope of this world. There is always more. And it never feels like it's just tacked in there to make plot points believable. Like, it feels organic and it feels natural. James Islington is also very good at hiding plot points because of the depth and the expanse of the world. You are so busy learning every step of the way that you're not trying to uncover secrets. And when plot twists come, like, they feel so natural, they feel so organic, but they're still hinting at a part of the world that you don't fully understand. So I think if you're a fan of Sanderson's storytelling and writing style, James Islington will also be a great author for you. Would I recommend picking up The Will of the Many right now? Absolutely I would, but also I wouldn't, because it's just the first book in a series and you will be where I am now, where you're desperate to continue, because this has the makings of like one of my favorite series of all time, but I have to wait for book 2 and it hurts. I will say, because I did say I had a couple of niggly bits about this series, it is purely that Viz is attending this prestigious academy where the elite children of this world are attending, and he is just good at everything. Like, every single challenge that he faces, he excels at. And to start off with, obviously Okiska chose him because he could see that he was a very gifted individual, but eventually, like, it gets to the point where I feel like he should be meeting more obstacles and things should be a little bit more difficult for him just because of the caliber of person that he is facing. It's unrealistic that he would literally be the best, most gifted, talented, educated, intelligent, fastest, fittest person in this entire society and this entire school. So those are all of my favorite books of 2024. I was thinking when I was making this list, I was like, oh, I didn't love a whole ton this year, which I didn't, but talking about them, it makes me realize that the ones that I did love, I did truly love. And here's hoping that in 2025, I can find more gems like The Will of the Many. I say that as though this was hard to uncover and that literally every person in the world wasn't screaming at me to read this one. But I do hope actually that I can get to the Licanius trilogy in 2025 and reread the first book and read the other 2 books in the trilogy from James Islington, just because of how much I enjoyed that. And I did really like The Shadow of What Was Lost, but I just didn't continue, and I want to rectify that in the future. So down in the comments, let me know what your favorite book of 2024 was. And if you would like to let me know you were here, but you feel like you don't have anything to say, then leave me a medallion emoji for The Will of the Many. There is an emoji that's like a gold coin or medallion, something Romanesque for the Roman Empire anyway. But aside from that, guys, please don't forget to like this video if you liked it and subscribe if you wanna. If you head to my description box, you will find a link to my Goodreads, my Instagram and my Patreon if you would like to follow me on any of those. But that's it from me today, guys. Bye.
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you'll go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.